I don't think I can catch it, so I'm just gonna show it. Can you see it? The old vintage car. It looks like something from the 60s, which is about 2 generations later than what my grandpa used to shoot. But it just stopped right here, flipped a U and turned around. And as I was crossing the street, watching this car flip a U and head in that direction, it reminded me of my grandfather, who we just celebrated his ceremonial 2 years after his death. And I don't know how I'm gonna link it to the random phrase generated today, but I'm gonna do my best. And my, oh my, today's random phrase generated today is roll with the punches. To endure the mishappenings that happen from time to time. Oh, if my grandpa could be described in 2 or 3 phrases, one of them would be exactly that. Roll with the punches. My grandfather, Grandpa Allen, is many things to me. I bear his name. It's my middle name, Harry Allen Decker. This man was like a second father to me. Growing up in Utah, my parents would drive down in the summer to Thousand Oaks. And while there, they would spend a couple of days. I was born at this point, my brother was born at this point, my sister was born at this point, but my sister was too young to be left there. And what my parents would do is they would visit this property. I call it, like it was my Garden of Eden growing up. But my parents would leave me at the Thousand Oaks property with my grandpa and my grandma. And we'd stay there for a month in the summer. And I remember growing up, those were my summers. We're spending it at Grandpa Allen's property. Now, why is this, like, how do I relate this back to my grandpa and rolling with the punches? My grandpa was and still is a mechanic. I know he passed, but if he could be alive right now, he'd be doing the same thing he did for 50 years straight, which was working on cars. My grandpa was known throughout Ventura and the LA, kind of the LA subworld of old cars, but he would customize, restore, and even create like bespoke versions of old 1940s and 1950s Americana, like vintage cars. He worked on Lincoln Zephyrs, on Fords, on I don't know if he worked on Pontiacs, but he worked on a bunch of different cars, and he had a mechanic shop out in the backside of the property. In fact, I know this is a random word generated for today, but I might actually show some B-roll footage at this point in the video to demonstrate like this Garden of Eden, because my recollection of this property as a child, it has not changed in 25 years. It has remained like this timeless piece of heaven where all the cars were in the back of the property. His shop is still there in the back of the property. He used to have, 100 cars that were in current projects spread and sprinkled across the entire property in different stages of development that he was working on. And my grandpa was always a hustler, always. He would spend every waking moment where he would have energy back in that shop, working and tinkering on old cars. And something that I love, that I see seems to be a common through pattern with other tinkerers and famous experimenters and inventors across time, is this idea that they were always working on a bunch of different projects at the same time. 2, they didn't care about money, fame, notoriety, or influence. All they really cared about was making just enough money to be able to continue tinkering and experimenting in their realm or dimension for just a day or 2 longer. It was like, I just need to make enough money now so that I can continue doing this tomorrow. And what is this thing? It would be like experimenting and tinkering and working on projects of their own interest. And my grandpa's just so happened to be, he loved restoring cars, working on the motors, building the chassis, reframing the body, taking a beautiful concept or idea from one car company and then taking another concept of another car company, and then like welding them, literally, but figuratively blending them together into one car that was uniquely his. And he would work on these cars all day, every day, for 50 years. And prior to that, again, he made enough money working with my great-grandpa, DeVerl, so that they ended up buying this property. And my grandpa was like, and I say this to say that, like, my grandma and my grandpa were a unit. They were a little team. They did everything together and decided, like, yep, this is where we're gonna die. And they made that decision back in the 70s. We love this piece of property. It's like 6-7 acres. We're gonna live here and we're gonna die here. And my grandma still lives there today. So rolling with the punches. My grandpa lived very frugal. My grandmother lived very frugal. For 20 years, my grandma did a daycare at the property. Kids 3 to 5, 2 to 5 would come and they would have a little daycare. They had a playground, they had a little set. And it goes to show you that, like, my summers as a kid, 2 to 12 years old, was raised by a maternal figure like my grandma, who naturally enjoyed raising and being around kids and would spend time with them. And I remember her painting my face and going around exploring the property like we were 2 little adventurers together. And then what I would do is I would go back to the property, back to the shop, and I would spend all day with my grandpa, working and tinkering on cars. Hey, hand me that Allen wrench. And I'd run across the shop and I'd go grab the right wrench and I'd bring it back to him, and he and I would continue working on a car. All right, we're gonna pick this up, and Jake, my uncle, would help pick up some heavy piece, heavy, like an engine block or something really, really heavy, and with my grandpa. And I remember being under it and them being like, if we drop this, it's gonna crush you. But me being under it, like helping out, pretending like I'm helping my grandpa and my uncle move this thing across the shop. And I have so many like unique tidbit memories spending time with my grandpa. But how does this go back to rolling with the punches? It was never easy because they never knew how they were gonna come up with money to pay bills for 50 years. 40 years, for 40 years. No, 77 to 20, 27, yeah, 40 years, about 40 years. They never knew because my grandpa never held a consistent job. It was, I'd work on cars because I like to work on cars, and my grandma would get to the point where like, bills need to be paid, Alan. Like we gotta, how are we gonna do this? And my grandpa would get super scrappy. He would come up with these innovative, unique ways to go to a swap meet and sell a bunch of stuff or reach out to his contacts. And he just knew the right people and had so much expert domain knowledge about these cars and all of these people and what projects they were working on and how they were working on it, that he would somehow creatively come up with some solution, sell some parts, sell a car, come up with the cash in hand to pay bills so that he could do it for another month. Tinker on new cars, tinker on cars, on projects. And that idea of like rolling with the punches is something that is so ingrained, I feel, in the Decker men, especially the first, I would say the lineage, the first sons of the Deckers. So I'm seventh generation first son. My son Leo is the 8th generation first son. My dad is first son. My grandpa Alan is first son. And but like always rolling with the punches. There's always some new problem that needs to be done that's never been solved before, and having to roll with the punches and like adapting and enduring through the mishappenings. And doing so, but this is what I guess what I love is that you can roll with the punches, compromising on your morals and your character. And my grandpa did not do that once. My great grandpa did not do that once. My dad did not do that once. These men that I look to, that I am so proud to represent, rolled with the punches without ever compromising on who they are to make ends meet. They always figured out a way to use their unique gifts and their skills and their perspective on life to fashion up a temporary solution to get the cash on hand to pay bills. And they rolled with the punches with finesse and personality, never losing sight of who they really are or what they hold valuable. And I, until right this very moment, I'm recognizing that like that's one of the most beautiful things about being a Decker, about what I'm currently going through, is dealing with like this mishappenings and doing everything I can to roll with the punches and endure through it without losing sight of who I am, without compromising on my morals. And that is a dance that, if we're using my dad and my grandpa and my great grandpa as the examples, seems to be a dance I might have to deal with and endure the rest of my life. And I get to look to my grandpa as a beacon, as an example to me of I can do hard things, I can roll with the punches, I can take on this mishappenings from time to time and endure it well without losing sight of who I am, thanks to him. Because that has been passed down and is in my DNA. And I got to watch that in real time as a child growing up. My grandpa dealing with how are we going to pay bills this month and coming up with some creative solution in his own way to solve that problem, to live another day, to tinker and experiment. And I could go off on a riff of how that the mother is, necessity is the mother of invention, and how getting in these moments of desperation and trying to come up with unique and novel solutions to at least temporary band-aids to mask the problem at hand for now actually ends up unearthing interesting, unique, novel innovations, which began to see themselves in my grandpa's reputation and his network. People always knew that he was working on interesting and novel things, so people always wanted to be around him. They always wanted to hang out with him and be around him because he was always working on exciting new projects. And what it would do is he would collaborate with people he could never have collaborated had he not always been in this state of like, I gotta come up with a unique solution. I gotta come up with a unique solution. By the way, I am seeing so much trash around here. I usually run on that side, and it's far less trash than this side, and it's like bothering me. But anyway, so I could go off in that runs, but I don't. I want to bring it back to rolling with the punches. My grandfather embodied that idiom, that phrase, rolling with the punches, and doing it gracefully without losing himself or compromising on his values, on his character, in order to temporarily satisfy what I know is overwhelming, soul-crushing anxiety and worry that comes from, I need to provide, and I have no idea how I'm to provide, but I'm gonna figure it out. And so help me God, I'm gonna do it even if it kills me, without losing myself in the process. And seeing that car today, and having all of these memories flood back into my mind about how much I miss him. I'd go on long runs with him. I'd go on long runs and I would just call up my grandpa and I record it. In fact, I'm gonna include maybe a couple of these recordings, these voicemails, because I would talk to him for hours. I just go on a run and I just listen to him. I did this week after week after week after week. I have hours and hours of conversations I'm having with my grandpa, who's now dead, who is now physically not with me, to the point where he would call me on Saturdays or random times and leave little voicemails saying, and I'll include those voicemails here, saying things like, "Hey man, just checking up on you. How you doing? I love you." and how much I miss him, but how as I roll with the punches in my own life, I see that I'm being a good boy, and I am reflecting one of his traits and honoring him by rolling with the punches in my own life, enduring through mishappenings from time to time without compromising my integrity. That I can now look at it as, when I'm doing that, I've got my grandpa right here with me, as an example of how to live. And I don't need mementos out in the world like a vintage car flipping a U-turn for me to be reminded of the fact of who I am, who my grandpa was and still is to me, and how I can best honor him by emulating some of his greatest characteristics, and instead recognize that whenever I am going through a hardship or a mishappening from time to time, and I endure it well, whilst remaining true to myself, my values, and my integrity, I have him right here with me. And use that as a reminder of who he is to me and what he's passed on to me and what I hope to pass on to my kids, my boys as well. So that's the random phrase generated today. Roll with the punches. Let's go right there. Roll with the punches.